Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. And the son came and said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no longer worthy to be called thy son. But the father said unto the servants, Bring hither the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf and slay it, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead and is alive again. It was lost and is now found. So they began to be merry. Now the older son was in the field, and as he drew nigh unto the house, he heard music and dancing. So here, continuing the parable of the prodigal son, here in the part of the 15th chapter of Luke. So we know that there's maybe like 10 more verses of, we finished this chapter with all prodigal sons. So, we're going to just be explaining, as we go along the way. So, how did we get here? Opening up on the 15th chapter, we saw the publicans and sinners come unto him, and how the scribes and Pharisees complained, that he's eating with publicans and sinners, and how he put forth the parable of the one lost sheep of the 99, how he went and searched for it, and that woman with the 10 silver pieces, how she lost one and swept the house until she found it, showing how there's great joy in the presence of the angels of God for one sinner that repented, more than 99 just persons that need no repentance. So we see this parable open up with how this man had two sons, and the younger came unto him saying, Father, give me the portion of goods that fall to me, and how he divided unto him his living, and how not many days after he gathered all and went into a far country and wasted his substance with riotous living. When he spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want, and how he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the field to feed swine. And we saw how he would have fain filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. But then when he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and even to spare, and I have perished with hunger? I will arise and go to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and I'm no longer worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. So he, arose and came to his father. When he was yet a great way off, the father saw him and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And that's where we ended. So, picking up, where we see the next verse says, And the son came and said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called thy son. So here he is, reciting this memorized thing that he, strategized to come unto the father with, from the point of view of how he understood the world. Like I said in the last video, how when he left, he was so cherished, by his household that he never ever imagined, he could be treated like this. So now that he got there and he's being treated like this, now he's coming onto his father, not being able, to see beyond expecting them to treat him like how these people just, mistreated him, even after he, spent all on them. So he concocted this, this reasoning, this, line of excuses to give to his father, being so humbled by life, right? And it's in this kind of humility where we are completely broken down, where God is able to restructure everything. Because, if you think about it, if, somebody had come unto him to give him wisdom, before he had left, then he would have still been in that, entitled, mentality. And then, operating from this entitled mentality, anything you would have taught him would have been a waste of time. Because, how do people learn? You teach them, right? And then they go out into the world and they find evidence to confirm these things. If you would have, tried to program him with wisdom, try to program him, with all these lessons that he's now learning, coming from this, younger son mentality, being so cherished in his father's house, then everything would have just gone over his head, and you would have wasted your time and his time, and you'd have just continued being that, snotty nosed kid that he was. So, him coming onto his father in this sense, now we see the fallow ground being broken up, the soil being loose. Now we can plant good seeds there. Now he has a grasp on, the honesty of life. There's no distortion of reality. This, experience really, I would say it was so, positive contribution to his, ultimate growth. Because now, he comes onto his father, understanding, that the world, it doesn't owe you anything. Understanding that, he has to play his part in this whole thing. We just saw him ask for his inheritance when the father was still alive. That's how entitled he was. So, he rehearsed this thing and he's coming onto his father, reasoning on how he thinks, things should work. So, I guess you could look at it that it's better that he came home humbled like this. Because he could have just come to the father with the same entitlement that he asked for his inheritance with. He could have come and asked for more and, went back to that same place and maybe, showed off on the people. He could have gone to somewhere else. There's no guarantee that he would have come home with, wisdom, learning from these things. What if he had come home bitter and angry and he came to get more resources, as, we often see in these modern day, young ones, right? Especially when they have, parents with money like that. How sometimes you only see them when they need something, and then they go off, to squander and live such a a lifestyle where they are preventing their future generation from having the benefits that they are experiencing from their parents. And really, that's all that they're doing. The privilege that your parents is giving you, you are now guaranteeing that your children will not be able to experience the same thing because, you're not in a mindset to build and to create. You're not in a mindset looking for legacy and longevity, to establish yourself and to hold court, to hold ground and set up shop, as, it is said. So after the father ran and kissed him, and he fell on his neck and kissed him. Now, imagine what must be going through the father's mind, seeing him speak like this. Did you ever stop and think about that? What is the father thinking? Why is my son speaking to me like this? We would ultimately even see him have, them giving him shoes. Was he wearing no shoes? What state that he returned? If he was just feeding swine, how clean was he? I know that, he took his journey to a far country, right? So he had to journey back. And I imagine that he got real dusty and dirty. So, what is this father thinking, looking at his son? Looking even dirtier than his workers that he has in the fields, with no shoes coming onto him, saying, I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. Did the father, did they have a conversation ultimately about what happened to him when he left? How he was treated, how he lost everything, and, how he even had to feed swine. Was this revealed unto the father? But imagine what must be going through the father's, mind. Seeing his son come unto him saying, I've sinned against heaven and before thee, and in thy presence, I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. So, he's thinking that, well, the title of son is, can be gained or lost based on actions. No, these things they're gained, by relation. His mom and father created him and they, took care of him as a child when he was old enough to start walking and to be on his own. Understand that you don't ever lose that. But his world was so shaken, that even the very basic things that one would come to expect, even that was shaken. And he was testing the waters out. That's what you see in his behavior. He's testing the waters out to see, how valid this new perspective is. How deep does it go? He's, it's like when, you're about to take a bath and you want to see if the water is warm enough. How, you put your hands in there, take it out, and if it's too cold, then you add some more, heat to the water. If it's too hot, then you turn it down and or maybe even add some more coldness to the water, right? So this is an experiment by this son. If you can understand, he's throwing the bait out there and seeing what will happen. Standing back. Is the father going to be angry and say, "Get out my face"? Is the father going to give him a long lecture and shame him? Is the father going to disown him in such a way? I think that he's ready to receive that right now. He's ready to walk away if he was told no. So I've sinned against heaven and in thy sight. So sinning against heaven, is doing something that ought not to be done. It's sinning against heaven is doing something that it would compromise your respect in the presence of all your subjects. Understanding that this is the master of the house. If they see you treat him like this, will they lose respect and maybe be more careless in their approach of how they speak to him, how they respond to his requests and commands, how they view him, if they can't laugh at him in front of his face, to laugh at him behind his back, expecting that there are certain things that ought not to be done. And a structure is established, and sometimes these rules they're not explicitly given, but we understand that certain lines should never be crossed. So I've sinned against heaven, right? And he's humbling himself, right, and calling this into action, showing that he's not conceited and that he's not irreverent fact of what he did. He's not disconsiderate, but we see him, like I said, I've sinned before heaven, and this is a man speaking. He left a little boy with riches, and he came back as a poor but man, a full man. They say that only a real man is able to apologize when he's wrong, right? Picture him apologizing before he had left. I don't think that would have ever happened. He was so entitled. So, and in thy sight, in thy sight means that, well, according to what you would have valued, I have crossed the line. Keeping in mind that you also have, a system of, reprimand and rebuke. You also have a system of correction. I've sinned in thy sight. I have, trampled on things that would cause or is supposed to cause the drawing of chastisement unto myself. I have sinned in thy sight, paying respect unto his father's authority and unto his word. Like I said, he came back home as a full man, and now he's ready to receive life lessons. This is not the same little boy that left. He came and said to his father, "Father, I have sinned, against heaven and in thy sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called thy son." So I'm no longer worthy to be called thy son. Look at the father looking on him. But like I said, he could have come home conceited, arrogant, come ask for more money and then left again. He could have just come and just resumed his place, not saying anything. But he fully got the lessons of what he was supposed to get. I'm no longer worthy to be called thy son. Misunderstanding the love that his father had for him. All right, so the next one says, but the father told the servants to bring forth the best robe and put on him, and put on his hand a ring and shoes on his feet. So being given the complete opposite, reaction. Now keep in mind that this is this man's son, right? If it was one of his servants that did this, maybe everything that he's saying right now would have been true. Maybe the father would have looked at him and said, you are not worthy to become my servant. I think you need to pack your things and go. Depending on how long he's been working for him, how much good, credit that he have stored up with him, how many, good things he has done to make the father understand that, well, maybe this was just a one slip up, but if he was the kind that was always getting in trouble and always causing problems, then, maybe this would have, stood true. You have crossed the line and, there's no coming back from it and I need you to go. So, this son, he was operating in a servant's mindset, how he, became servant to this man, feeding his swine. And it shows really how sometimes, we can, be molded into a certain identity and we're unable to escape this thing, whether it be good or whether it be negative. It can be a good identity, it can be a negative one. Not understanding that, for each, scenario that we're allowed to have a different, presentation. You can't be the same person as at work that you are with your wife and children. You cannot be that same person, right? You cannot be the same person playing a sport as you are at work or even, with your family, again, wife and children. Or, you can't be the same person when you're asking a stranger on the street for directions as you are with your family or at work. Understanding that, and even with relationships, you can't be one the same way you are with your male friends as you are with your female friends, right? And even within this group of male friends, you will be different with one friend as you will with another. You'll be different with one female friend as you will with another, right? So, understanding that we are allowed to change, based on the context of what we are in. Because wisdom gives you context also in how to behave, when you are in a different scenario. So he's taking this, servant's mentality and applying it now onto his father. So while he did learn some wisdom, there's still a lot way to go. So the father hearing this confession, he has a stronger frame than his son. Because now is what he's doing actually is looking at these words that his son just told him, and he's destroying all of them and having uprooting all these seeds that his son is now trying to plant. His mentality, his frame of reference is stronger than his son right now. As strong as the son feels about this. So he sends the servant for the best robe. Where he was coming from, no man gave unto him. How he shared his resources and then no man gave unto him. He had to feed swine just to get by. So, we see the bountifulness of, coming home being applied unto him. So the best robe, you're treated different here. You are family. You're coming in here with this servant's garment and I'm taking it off you and giving you the best robe. There's a scripture in the Bible. It said, I saw Joshua, stand before the Lord and the devil stood at his right hand to, resist him. But then the angel rebuked the devil saying, durst not bring a railing accusation against him. Is this not a firebrand plucked from the fire? And they were commanded to give Joshua, a new white robe. I think that, there's a similar scenario here. Because he's coming home with this, stained robe. It's so dirty. And the devil on his mind, telling him these things that, you're no longer worthy to be called a son. Baby don't even go home. They're not going to want to see you. But, we saw the rebuking and him being given this new white robe. Put a ring on his hand. Joseph in Egypt, when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream and told Pharaoh what to do, how he should take up a fifth part of all the crops each year, to save for the famine, and to set a wise man over it. And Pharaoh said, who is, wiser than thou to know, the interpretation of, the Lord's, messages. And, he put on him a robe, a royal robe. He put on his finger a ring and made him ride in a second chariot. So, he's been, restored to his position of royalty here. No more, hardships, no more being, rejected and refused by, those that don't really know you so well. Because, I guarantee you, if, this was in a place where they knew his father, it seemed as if his father would have enough influence that even if he did spend all, they wouldn't have, looked at him so harshly because they would have known his father, right? And they would have wanted to get in the father's good graces. Maybe instead of feeding swine, he would have having doing something more prestigious. He would have put him like over some accounts, having him manage, some important things, where he would be a nobleman, even though he's still working. But, the fact that nobody knew him and, but at the same time, he was just spending all his money on them, right? So that didn't buy him no credit, and that goes to show you when you try to buy people's affection, I think it has the opposite effect. They look down on you even more. I think that, in my life where I've ever, observed people trying to win people over with material things or, favors or services, that it has the opposite effect. Yeah, they might smile and laugh, in your face because they are getting this benefit and it is a benefit. It's a tangible, benefit unto them. And, they're not going to want to disrespect you to your face. But, if you were to be able to uncover the veil over their heart and to see how they think of you for doing these things, then you would never ever try to do it in the first place. So if he was at a place where his father was known and he needed work, they would have given him something more prestigious. I guarantee you, right? So they put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. When the children of Israel were leaving Egypt, how they spoiled the Egyptians, with all manner of silver and gold, earrings, rings, bracelets, necklaces, even, clothing. How, it was termed as spoiling. And, spoiling is what is done during war. When one wins, then he takes all his enemies' possessions. It's called spoiling. So when they were leaving bondage, as he's doing now, leaving this, servant feeding swine, right? Leaving this place. Now he's given a ring, a gold ring, and, shoes on his feet. So, at what point did he lose his shoes? Because I'm sure he left with his shoes. Did he have to trade these shoes for money for food? Did they get ruined while he was feeding swine? At what point did he become shoeless? Or did they say, put shoes on his feet because his shoes were so dirty? Was it the condition of the shoes being so bad that he had to change it? Well, I mean, if he's going to change the robe, then no doubt the shoes also. But, was he wearing shoes? Did he come, barefooted? One can say that this experience, it knocked his shoes off, completely, literally. So, this father's reaction right now, and it's such a strong reinforcer for a child. We can, a lot can be learned from this lesson right here. How his father is responding to him. How did he come unto his father? Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight. And I'm no longer worthy to be called thy son. He didn't get to the part where he said, make me as one of thy hired servants. Maybe, he said it in Matthew and Mark, but, he didn't get there this far. I think the father cut him off before he got there. Because, that was what he was supposed to say next. So, how he came unto him, expected to be mistreated, expected to be yelled at and disconsidered. I think at times a child will come to a parent, and if you're not sensitive, you can miss these moments where, their self-esteem is on the line. I don't know, maybe something happened at school or with their friends, or, it's just like you have a midlife crisis. Maybe they're having a young life crisis, right? Identity, issue, and they want to know where they fit in, and they might come to you, with this, and you'll see it if you can read their spirit, and it's in this moment where, what this father did, how he gave him the best robe and the ring and the shoes. Now use this with a moment of correction, where they did something wrong, and, correction is given, at the same time with love, right? Because, one thing we can learn from this story is that only, your parent is going to love you as your parent. When he went to this other man, this citizen, when he joined himself to this citizen of the country, he sent him to feed the swine, understanding that was maybe the worst thing on his chore list to do. So he sent him to do the worst thing, from scratch. He didn't have him start out, somewhere else, maybe watering the garden or picking fruits or, arranging some of his things, but, cleaning the house even, or whatever, he could find himself doing, just watching over the flock. But, he sent him to feed the swine, which was the lowest thing on, understanding that, this was not his child, right? And how easy it was for him to assign him such a task, right? So, understand that, you are your, child's parent. Only you can love them in this way. Anywhere else they go, they're not going to receive it. I've seen where even, a child will lose a parent, right? And they'll go and stay with like an aunt or a cousin. And, when they're there, they don't treat them like how the parent, treated them. I mean, yeah, they're still family, but you can understand that there's levels and degrees of treatment. Especially if they have their own child, they'll, revere their own child, over this, child that lost their parent, even though they are still family. So notice that, you're the only one that can provide this, for them. And as how this, child, this young man, he came to his father saying, I'm not worthy to be called thy son. And the father gave him the best of everything that was there, the best robe, the best shoes, the best ring. You have to be, ready to catch these situations, understand what they mean, and know how to approach it. We have too many children running around with self-esteem issues. We usually see it. How do we see it, right? Self-esteem issues, in males, then people walk all over them in life. They don't have a backbone. They don't have self-respect, and boundaries because they don't feel that they're worth it. If I don't feel I'm worth anything, then people can come and tell me who I am, and they're gonna come and tell me something low and bad, right? And then because I have no self-respect, then I have to accept it, and then I have to live in this world that other people create for me. For female children, then what? Then self-esteem issues again. But because they have the value of sexuality, then now they might become promiscuous. Attempting to gain self-worth by trading their sexual availability to receive these things. And like I said, when you trade these important things, I said about money, earlier. But you could add this to the list. If they trade that, then they never, people look down on you even so much more. So the next verse says, "Bring hither the fatted calf and slay it, and let us eat and be merry." So now he's bringing the fatted calf for his son. Compare the fatted calf to the swine that he was feeding, right? We know that the calves, they are considered above the swine, which is considered unclean. So whereas if you look at it, he was feeding the lowest thing. He was doing them a service in feeding them. But now here we have this calf being sacrificed to feed him. So the calf is serving him, whereas he was serving the swine. The difference in treatment between houses. So after he put on all these things, now it's time to eat like a king. And like I said, when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, how they gave them, they spoiled them. Remember, that was right after the Passover, after they had eaten. So, it's a reverse in order because they were supposed to eat first and then take the spoils. But now we took the spoils first and then we ate, this fatted calf. So, we understand that the fatted calf is noted, by the herdsmen, while they're taking care of these animals. Look and see, which one, is seems to be the richest in plumpiness in meat, and would be most tender for a feast and celebration. And no doubt they're gonna have a list of hierarchy. Which one is the number one? Which one is number two? Number three, and so on. So this calf, was they knew who this calf was. They didn't have to go and search. Bring hither the fatted calf. So like a tender bottle of champagne. In modern day society, this calf was the equivalent. It was a celebration. After a great accomplishment. The son, he returned home. So whereas he spent all his living on riotous living. Now imagine he had, feast at his table with the best meats and wines, fruits, vegetables, and everything that a king could have, right? We saw where he gave unto his friends, but then no man gave unto him. So we see, the father giving unto his son. So, we see him returning to his position that he left, when he left. Like I said, if you read between the lines, you would see that he was tired of being in his father's shadow, and even in his older brother's shadow, being the younger brother. How he was over sheltered, and you know didn't this over sheltering, it didn't allow him to pierce through the veil and to taste what life really was like. I used the example yesterday of a car. When you turn your steering wheel to the right, it should go right. When you turn it to the left, it should go left. What if when you turn it to the right, it could go either right or left, just whenever. That's kind of the life he was having. He wasn't given true feedback. So, he returns now to his position, but now with a little more understanding, with a little more, experience and wisdom. He returns, and now here we have a dilemma, right? Because, if he, falls back into the same behavior patterns and treatment, then, give it, 6 months, a year, and then he's gonna be right back where he started. Even though, like, you can't take knowledge from a person, and once you have it, it's yours forever. But he might forget, the relevance. He might forget the taste. He might still have the knowledge, but he'll forget the taste of the knowledge. The bitterness of how it felt, in his teeth when he was chewing it, and the urgency that gave. That came with. So bring him to the fatted calf and slay it. Let us eat and be merry. He's coming here with all these sorrows. So let us eat and be merry. Let's put off this energy that he's coming with, telling me that he's not worthy to be called my son. Expecting me to yell at him and scream at him and talk down to him. as if he's not still my son. So, I would ask this question, you know, is there a over, merriment in this household? Because, this son, he left, and what did he do? He went to be merry with everybody that he could find. Not understanding that his goods would run out eventually. Is there a constant state of merriment? Which is exactly what he was trying to escape. All right, so the next one says, "For my son was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is now found. And they began to be merry." So this father having this declaration. Now, we see wisdom in this father, right? In how he, says this statement. Understanding the range of possibility that could have happened to his son. The son, he could have gone off and become successful and never came back home. He could have gone off and, failed and came back home as he did. He could have gone out and, lost his life, right? He could have gone out. What if he, resorted to stealing when he, became to be in need? Walking with the same expectation of being in his father's house, how he could have anything he wanted. What if he applied that to the whole world and, he took somebody's things and they cut his hand off, or, he was in prison, his father waiting for him to come home, not knowing what would have happened. So his father, looking the wisdom of years that he has, running this household, dealing with servants, meeting deadlines, trading, goods, whether it be crops, animals, making products, wine, milk, whatever the father did. Because this, man, he sounded like he had a real extensive empire, to manage many things. So the father, he's looking at the bottom line. And it's always good to know the upper line and the bottom line. I think that's in life. Sometimes we get filled with too much good emotions, and then we're threatened to leave logic and sense. And I see this thing where I see people, they think that with enough success that it's just everything is going to be automatic, and they don't need wisdom anymore. They don't need cunningness, the ability to plan and strategize, to manage risks, be able to detect risks, and trickery. It's almost as if they're waiting to go off into a cloud which is gonna carry them forever and ever. Not understanding that life is always wisdom, life is always hard work, life is always keeping your eyes on the bottom line, keeping your ears to the ground. Your life is always figuring out what your competitors are coming with. Life is always anticipating how they might come to try to throw you off your game. Life is always about contending. It doesn't change. I think we get weary in life, and we fall asleep at times. So his father, he's having such a realization. My son was dead and is now alive. Because it's like Schrodinger's cat, how the cat inside the box, it is both dead and alive at the same time. When he left his father's house and he couldn't keep an eye on him, then he was dead and alive at the same time, because he asked for his inheritance, and this man is a rich man. How much did his father give him? Him traveling in strange lands with this kind of money. What kind of attention is that going to attract onto him? Worse, if he pulls it out and somebody sees it, right? I mean, they're gonna smile in his face, but then they're gonna figure out where he lodges, and then later in the night they're gonna come and get that. Maybe taking his life in the process or not. Depending on how they feel, right? So the second that he left the house, he became dead and alive at the same time, and he was in God's hands. Hopefully this man was a praying man like Job, how he sacrificed every morning for his children in case they curse God in their heart. Using his own words. So, and this also shows us, how we all as people, we're in a collective environment, but just the different thoughts, that go through our mind, even while we're in each other's presence, the different, coping methods that we have, the different interpretation of things that we have, how we all stand together, and we're all so different. And, it seems as if this would just be too inharmonious for us to coexist. But, we overlook it so much that it might as well not even be there. Because while he was saying, "I'm no longer worthy to be called thy son," his father was thinking, you were dead and now you're alive, right? He went off into a far country. And his father knew that he didn't have much, life, survival instincts or experience. And we can see that, very clearly how he gave to everyone. But yet still, when it was time for him to be in need, how he had to work, feeding swine just for a meal. The father, he knew the inexperience of this, younger son. And being a realist, I would call it right here. Being a realist, understanding that he was good as dead the moment he left the house. So he was dead and is now alive, and was lost and is now found. The last one says, "Now the older brother was in the field, and as he drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing." So ending off with this verse here. So now the older brother, he's coming home, right? Having We didn't see interaction between these two brothers before he left. We know that he came to his father and asked for his inheritance, and then he left. Did he, what kind of goodbyes did he say to his brother? Did the brother try to talk him out of it? Was there tension between them? We ultimately know that this brother, he would be upset, right, of how the father made this great party for him, how he never made a party for him, the older brother. So the older brother, he's coming home. This reminds me of when, Isaac was dying and how he sent Esau into the field to hunt venison and bring him and make it, cook for him before he died so he could bless him. And how, Rebecca and Jacob, they, went and tricked the father that he was Esau and fed him, and Jacob, he took the blessing. So it would seem as if, this son is taking the blessing. And that's why the older brother Esau upset, because Esau was also so upset. He wanted to kill Jacob. That's why he had to go on the. So no, it doesn't say what he's coming in from the field from doing. Was he a hunter also like Esau? No doubt, it wasn't flock, because or maybe it could have been flock. Maybe he left it with one of the servants. We're not given much about this older brother, what his role in the family business was, what his skills were. But he's coming home, not knowing that his brother is coming. Maybe not even expecting the brother would have returned. So as he drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. So this was an obvious celebration. This wasn't a quiet dinner, with some nice meat and grains, juices and vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. But this was a loud celebration. And the father, he was going all out for this son. So now when, he drew nigh to the house, we know that he heard music. But, can you hear dancing? How do you hear dancing, right? The Bible says that he heard dancing. Did he hear the stomping of the ground from this dancing? No doubt the servants were there also. And did he invite the townspeople? We just saw where the man found his lost sheep and the woman her lost coin. How the first thing they did was call together their friends and neighbors to rejoice with them. So no doubt, the same thing is going on here. So this was just a spectacle. He could hear them dancing. No doubt he could hear the cheering and the music. I think that certain music is associated with dancing, especially in those times. How they, the formality of their dancing compared to us today, which dancing is pretty much just grinding, right? Grinding and twerking. All right, so here we are in the middle of the 15th chapter of Luke, where it started out saying, Then drew nigh unto him the publicans and sinners for to hear him. But the scribes and Pharisees murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. But Jesus put forth a parable unto them, Which man among you, if he have 100 sheep and loseth one, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go and seek that which was lost until he hath found it? And when he find it, he layeth it on his shoulders and rejoiceth. Then when he cometh home, he calleth to him his friends and neighbors, saying, Come and rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. Likewise I say unto you, there is great joy in heaven over one sinner that repenteth more than 99 just persons that needed no repentance. Or what woman hath been 10 pieces of silver if she lose one, doth not light a candle and sweep the house, and search diligently until she hath found it? And when she found it, she called together her friends and neighbors, saying, Come rejoice with me, for I have found my piece which was lost. Likewise I say unto you, there is great joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repenteth. So then he put forth a parable unto them. A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger came and said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto him his living. Though not many days afterwards, the younger son gathered all and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. Now when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. So he went and joined himself unto a citizen of that country, who sent him into the field to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. Now when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare? How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no longer worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. So he arose and came to his father. And when he was yet a great way off, the father saw him, had compassion on him, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. So we pick up right here where it says, And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no longer worthy to be called thy son. The father said to the servant, Bring hither the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf and slay it, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and is now found. So they began to be merry. So now, when the older son was coming in from the field, as he drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. I am Straw Greenhorn.